Story 1. Teacher wouldn't let a kid go to get tissues from the bathroom, so he stood up and blew his nose in the quiz we were taking and threw it on the ground. Not a huge deal, but definitely funny at the time. Story 2. One of my teachers in high school had an angry cupboard in her classroom that she would lock herself and occasionally get locked in by students. She went there so often that she had a fridge, a microwave, and a kettle in there. Story 3. We were doing an exam. We were told we could do the exam one way and could submit it early. We got to the room and he reneged and said what we did is no longer valid. An hour in, he changed his mind and said we could do the original way. One person in my class said, "So you are lying?" And the teacher just had a big smug smirk on his face. This guy just exploded on him, submitted his exam, and left. This happened to me with a class once. The teacher had told us she was grading things a certain way, and it meant I had enough extra credit where I could skip a project and still get an A in the class. The day the project was due, she changed how much she was going to affect our grade. I absolutely lost it, called her an incompetent, and stormed out to the principal. Fortunately for me, the principal took my side and forced her to stick to the original weighting. Story 4. Dude picked up a desk and a full-on caveman threw it at the teacher. Most impressive thing I've seen someone do. Guy was toothpick skinny, but his anger turned him into Red Hulk rage strong. I have a friend who's a high school teacher. She said that every year, without fail, sometime in the first week when one of the biggest kids in the class, bigger than her, started acting out, she would tell him to stand up, pick up his desk over her head, so the class thought she was going to throw it at him, and then put it outside in the hallway and tell him to sit there for the rest of the period. She said it worked every time, and she wouldn't have any major problems for the rest of the year. And yes, I very much believe her, both because of her personality and the fact that, at least at the time, I knew she worked out. And you could tell she had solid arm muscles. Story 5. Teachers back in high school used to think making jokes at the shy kids' expense would help coax them out of their shell and feel more comfortable. It was all fun and games until one day he pushes the wrong button and the kid is up screaming and crying, explaining to the teacher exactly why it's not okay to do what he's doing through their emotions and tears. Teacher made a half-assed, non-apologetic apology and got fired about 6 months later when other alumni and students opened up about their experience with the same teacher. Story 6. Me getting mad at my teacher back in elementary school. We used to do these timed multiplication tests, and I've always been bad at math. The day we did the test for multiples of 2, I got them all right, because that's easy, and the teachers were convinced I cheated off of someone else. Sent me to the office and called my parents and everything. I was so proud of myself for actually being able to complete the test only for that to happen. I was so upset and frustrated. Story 7. Early mid-90s, 2nd or 3rd grade, and this one kid was always picking fights with the teachers. One in particular he really didn't like. One day during passing, the teacher was standing at the top of the stairs greeting students. This kid came up behind him and hard pushed him forward and down the flight of stairs. Another kid a few years later got angry enough to pick up one of those combined desks. Desk, storage, chair in one unit, and shot it across the room towards the same teacher. This teacher was super strict, a Vietnam vet. He kept a tin of peanut butter from his military rations as a memento. One student stole it one day and emptied the contents, leaving the open tin on his desk. That was the one time I saw that teacher look truly sad. Story 8. Freshman year of college in my psychology class. We had one dude who would constantly sleep in class. The professor had had enough. Borrowed about 5 textbooks, stood in a chair next to the kid, and dropped the books on the desk next to the kid. It was loud. The sleeping kid literally fell out of his chair, freaked out, grabbed his bag and left the lecture hall, only to come back in and yell at the professor from the door. He didn't show up again for 2 more classes. Story 9. I had modern history first thing in the morning with this one teacher who was a coach and a young dude, kinda smart but overall a good guy. I had the hardest time staying awake in that class, if he wasn't lecturing, if it was just like writing time or whatever. After a couple of warnings, this is what happened. My cousin was also in the class. I remember waking up to him shaking me and saying, "Balti Nerdist, we gotta go, there's a fire." And I look around and the whole room is empty. So I freak out and jump up and run out the door. Unbeknownst to me, the coach had every student silently get up and walk out of the class. So when I ran out into the hall, they were all there yelling, "Gotcha!" That was my freshman year. As late as my senior year, freshmen would come up to me in the halls and say, "Coach just told us about the time you fell asleep in his class." I wonder if that story is still told a couple of decades later. Story 10. My friend in 7th grade would have very aggressive arguments with our arts teacher and would frequently get kicked out of the class. One time, after screaming at each other for 10 minutes, he finally gets kicked out once again. So he punches the desk, curses the teacher out, grabs his backpack, and before opening the door to leave, he turns back at the teacher and the whole class and angrily goes, "I'm going, but I will be back." Everybody laughed except for the teacher who kept arguing with him as he went down the hallway towards the principal's office. Story 11. It was me. I was the angry student. It was during the panic time 4 years ago and my school was doing Zoom classes. I got a phone call in the middle of English. My grandpa was sick and I was living with him, and my grandma was the one calling. I answer because what's the teacher going to do? My grandpa passed. She tells me to get off my phone. I unmute myself to tell her that my grandpa just passed and she removed me from the Zoom meeting. Everyone was on my side. Story 12. When I was in primary school, we had this one very troubled, very angry girl in our class. One day she was arguing with the teacher. Can't remember what over, but it wasn't that serious. She punched the teacher in the stomach and kicked her. The teacher was very pregnant at the time. Luckily, the baby was okay. This same girl, after we left primary school, went to a secondary school with someone I knew. One day I heard from my friend that this girl had stabbed a teacher through their hand with a pen because the teacher confiscated her phone. I'm not sure what happened to the girl. If I had to guess, I'd assume she's in prison somewhere. Story 13. Doesn't compare to the other posts in here, but I had a professor just this last semester, my last semester before graduating, that had shadow due dates. She would have things set to be due on Sundays and Saturdays with absolutely no postings about them. These assignments were not even on the assignment schedule. People, myself included, were extremely upset at the random zeros we would get. Me and several other students reached out to her asking what the deal was. Her response was basically, "This class is teaching you how to be efficient with your time and maintain a difficult schedule." Me and many other students sent emails to other professors and school staff about it, and the solution was that they had her drop 2 of our lowest grades, and she had to move all the weekend due dates to either Mondays or Fridays. But that was one of the most ridiculous things I've ever seen, and needless to say myself and the majority of my classmates were pissed. Story 14. A kid in high school threw his desk at the teacher, tried to rush him down. The teacher, after taking the hit from the desk, basically caught the kid on the charge and WWE slammed him straight on his back onto the ground, knocking the wind out of him. The kid was left in handcuffs and I never saw him again. That was my first day being transferred to that class. It was the bad kids class. I got transferred there because I didn't do homework. Story 15. In high school, I had a science teacher. She told me I would drop out of school, grow to be a failure, and die alone. She got mad at my friend for being on his phone and said, "Your mother would not be happy with this behavior." His mom died the past summer. He flipped out, cursed her out incoherently through tears, threw a desk at the lab tables, and ran out. Story 16. I told this story elsewhere in the annals of Reddit, but my 5th grade teacher threw a metal stapler at me for quietly answering the questions of the girl who sat next to me, who had been out sick for a few days. The stapler damn near hit me in the face, and as he came charging down the aisle at me, I pushed my chair at him and got TF out of the classroom. He's lucky he left the resulting meeting between him, the principal, and my rather pissed-off father with all of his teeth. Story 17. A substitute biology teacher assigned us a specific page from our textbook. She wrote like page 97 or something. Next day she fails pretty much everyone, because she meant page 91, and tried to defend herself, saying that her one looked like 7 inches and that she told that beforehand, except nobody heard her say so. Not even the good students. So, when she's called to cover another class, don't remember which, my school would just assign random teachers to substitute random classes. About half of the class was pretty much heckling her. A kid said he was going to fart out loud. People started singing a song for a talent show later that week, and just overall being little craps to her. Our head teacher and our counselor had to be called. One of the boys got a chew down of a lifetime by the latter. Since then, every time the sub-teacher had to cover one of our classes, she always came with a smug attitude. You can do nothing because the school will always side with me. Fortunately, she ended up leaving about a year later. Story 18. In my Spanish class, my teacher suffered a back injury and was out most of the year. In her absence, we had a different substitute teacher come in every day, whoever was available. Some of them didn't even know Spanish. On those days, class would literally just be us opening our textbooks and doing some vocabulary with no interaction from the teacher. You can probably tell this didn't hold people's attention very long. One day we had a new sub come in, and as she was instructing us to open our books, a couple guys in the back were having a side conversation about football. The teacher told them to quiet down, and they went back to their conversation, but at a slightly lower volume. That was all it took for this sub to give up. She just shrugged, said, "Fine, you don't want to learn? I'm done." Then she went back to her desk and got on her laptop. Keep in mind, it was just 2 people out of a class of 20 plus who had been talking. The rest of us sat there wondering what we were supposed to do. The kids who had been talking apologized and asked her to continue the lesson, but she refused. I'm thinking the class before ours must have given her a really hard time because I can't think of another reason why she gave up so quickly. Pretty sure she quit after that. Story 19. My friend at the time, a 15-year-old girl, beat the ever-loving crap out of a creepy gym substitute teacher because she caught him jerking off onto a boy's underwear in the locker room when she went looking for her charger in my bag. We all ran from the showers halfway through because she was screaming about a creep, only clad in towels and birthday suits. To find her kicking and slapping this guy while he was whimpering on the floor. I'm almost twice her size and had a scary amount of trouble restraining her from finishing off that man, however much he deserved it. I've never seen anyone so angry. Story 20. In high school last year, we had this substitute science teacher that would say absolutely terrible things in class, from personal stories of her attempting coat hanger abortions in her youth, to calling students of certain ethnicities rats, to even getting physically violent with students. After reporting it to school administration and not being taken seriously, I invested in a dictaphone to record the stuff she would say one day she found out I was recording and tried to rip the device out of my hands violently. I pushed her away and literally looked her dead in the eye and said, "This is all on tape, your career is over." Called the police and reported her for verbal and physical assault and provided the evidence to both the school and police. She was fired within a month. Story 21. I went to school with 2 brothers who were good old country boys. One of them did something, and the teacher pulled him into the hall and started talking to him. No yelling that I remember. His brother sees this and sprints down the hall and full-on Superman punches the teacher. Story 22. When I was at university, we were split into groups and asked to begin a project. The next week, we had to show our progress. No other group except ours had started the project. So for the entirety of the class, the lecturer tore our work to pieces in front of the entire class. Without any recognition, we were the only group to at least try. The next week when the lecture began, I put my hand up and called the teacher the most unprofessional and disrespectful teacher of all time. Asked them why they could not take a moment to find anything at all positive in our work, and why they had to publicly humiliate us in front of the class if they had issues with our project, and so on. My rant went on probably longer than needed. My lecturer actually cried, and then apologized to us in front of the whole class. She later explained to me she never wanted to be one of those teachers. Either way, after calling her out and making her cry, she was overly nice about our projects going forward. Story 23. I was in first grade, 6 or 7 at the time, and a book we were reading had my mom's name in it. Her name isn't really uncommon, but my little self thought it was so cool. I raised my hand and confidently said, "That's my mom's name." This woman looked me dead in the eye for like 3 seconds and said, "Good for you," in the most monotone, rude, lifeless manner possible. Even at the young age of 6, I could hear the sarcasm and negativity in her voice. She kept looking at me for like 2 seconds with her blank stare before I broke the gaze. One of the other kids thought what I said was cool at first, but promptly lowered his voice excitement after hearing her response. That was probably my earliest memory of someone being blatantly rude for no reason. Story 24. Back in the mid-late 90s, my class got a teacher fired with our anger. She was an older teacher that had been teaching for decades and was used to being able to hit kids. One time she gave a girl in our class a black eye after hitting her with a ruler. So at lunchtime, we marched to the principal's office while chanting, "Fire Mrs. Brown! Fire Mrs. Brown!" She didn't end up coming back, and we had a few relief teachers until they got us a new one for that class. Story 25. In 8th grade, the tallest guy in our grade got into it with the teacher coach for I don't know what class or sport. This was a long time ago. Kid was already over 6. and the teacher was a brick crab house. They stood nose to nose for several minutes, or it seemed that long. The rest of us were just standing there watching, wondering who would flinch or swing first. It ended up being a draw, I guess. The tall kid sat back down. Didn't go to the office. Pretty sure he ended up being a career Marine. So obviously he had no fear even then. They were super hot for a couple minutes, though, yelling in each other's face. It was a little scary for the rest of us in the room. Story 26. I have a Romanian guy in my class. He's 15 and is really aggressive. Our classroom is big and has a sink and a mirror next to the door. Last week I redid my makeup after sports because it got messy and ran down. Behind me I hear this guy say, "She puts on makeup." I turned around and looked at him and cussed him out. Then I ran to the bathroom and cried. I snapped quickly at people. Some of my friends comforted me, and one of them got the teacher. I got back to class with teary eyes, and he just stared at me, like he was enjoying it to see me cry. Our teacher started yelling at him, and then he suddenly flipped the table over and used a pencil as a weapon. He yelled something in Romanian and threatened to finish us off with that pencil. Our teacher struck him down and told us to call the principal. He got picked up from school by his dad, and since then he got put into a special class. Story 27. My high school art teacher had a thing where she couldn't remember names, so we had name cards on our desks at all times. She can only remember faces, not names. I think it's Asperger's. Anyway, this one time she accidentally tried guessing this one guy's name. She called him Alejandro, but his name was Alex. For some reason, this guy got so mad he got up, got in our teacher's face, and started belittling her because she guessed his name wrong. It was so sad. Some of us got up and pulled him away, but he wouldn't shut up. She started crying and had to leave for the day. So sad for her. Story 28. In high school, I was in honors calculus, which went on for 2 periods. During this time, I had kidney issues and was placed on a diuretic. I was pretty much a straight A student, and this teacher was not a very popular one. No one liked her because she was very rude to students. I was raising my hand for about 5 solid minutes to be excused to the restroom, making direct eye contact with the teacher, and she didn't acknowledge me needing to be excused. I couldn't hold it and left to go to the bathroom. As I returned, in front of the class, she started lecturing me about showing respect and waiting to be excused. I turned to her and loudly told her that the next time this happens, I will piss in the back of her classroom as a sign of respect. The whole classroom erupted, and I felt so cool. Looking back at it, I cringe. Story 29. When I was in school, a very much loved teacher passed away roughly in the middle of the school year. Arrangements had been made for other teachers and a substitute teacher to cover the original teacher's classes for the rest of the year. For some reason, one-year group decided to just be nasty to the substitute teacher, who also seemed quite young, so maybe quite new to teaching too. That ended with her crying and leaving the classroom. Just because she was doing her job. Story 30. Drafting isn't art. There is legit right and wrong in drafting. Drafting teachers are usually technology, ed, teachers, not art teachers. Totally different teacher certification. The teachers who teach woodworking, electronics, etc. are the ones who teach drafting. Drafting is meant to be precise and accurate representation, blueprints and schematics. Brunky is still bad, though. Story 31. The boy who got angry at the PE teacher returned to school under cover of darkness and smashed every window on the ground floor of the main block. The 1960s design style meant that there was a lot of glass to smash, and I dread to think how much it cost to replace all those windows. Probably around £20,000. And that was in the mid-90s. He got expelled. And not personally, but the number of children in the UK who have stabbed teachers in recent years would suggest there's a lot of anger that's not being addressed. In my day, if you were angry at a teacher, you found out which car was theirs and let the tires down, or egged their car, or wrote a scathing phrase on the toilet walls, or smashed windows. Story 32. My 4th grade teacher hated me. I found out years later when I met some other kids who had had her in other years that she always picked on one boy in the class each year, usually the most effeminate or soft-spoken boy in the year. I was a 9-year-old boy obsessed with Beanie Babies and Sailor Moon. I was an easy target. We had come to blows a few times already through the school year, and my mom had gone to the principal and school board with complaints, but nothing had really happened to her, though I had had some punishments reduced. Anyway, she once pulled out my backpack from my locker and started waving it around the hallway and yelling, "Matthew's bag smells like cat pee." I hadn't realized my cat had peed on it that morning, or I wouldn't have brought it with me. When I snatched it away from her, she got down to my level and said, "Do that again and I'll have you expelled. Your mother won't be able to save you this time." I slapped her in the face. I got suspended for 2 weeks, but ultimately was let off rather easily because a lot of kids in my class actually vouched for me when I told the principal what had happened with my backpack. She still treated me like crap the rest of the year, but it never got physical again. She lived in the same senior citizen apartment building my mom did until my mom passed away last month. I remember seeing her in the hallway one time when I was visiting, and she looked at me with absolute daggers and quickly walked away. I was in my late 20s at that point, and had she said anything to me, I would have lost it. She absolutely derailed my education for a few years and destroyed my self-esteem. When I went back to the building after my mom passed, her name was gone from the entry buzzer. I don't know what happened to her, but I hope she's dead too.